Have you ever faced a moment when life just felt impossible, when every door seemed shut, and you couldn't see a way out? Let me share a story with you about how faith can turn even the darkest times into moments of hope. I want to tell you about a man named John. John was an ordinary guy, much like any of us. He lived in a small town, worked a regular job, and took care of his family. But life, as it often does, threw him a curveball. One day, John lost his job. The company he had worked for years decided to close, and just like that, his source of income vanished. At first, John wasn't too worried. He had some savings and he trusted that he'd find a new job soon. But days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. With each passing day, the weight of the situation grew heavier. Bills piled up and John's savings quickly ran dry. He began to feel hopeless, wondering why God had allowed this to happen to him. I think we've all had moments like this, haven't we? Times when we feel forgotten, abandoned and alone in our struggles. But here's where John's story takes a turn. Instead of giving in to despair, John turned to something deeper, his faith. You see, John was a Christian, and even though his circumstances were tough, he remembered one of the core messages of his faith, that God has a plan for every one of us, even when we can't see it. In the Bible, Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." John took this verse to heart. Instead of questioning why things were so difficult, he began to trust that God had something greater in store for him. Every morning he would pray, asking God for strength and guidance. He didn't pray for the situation to magically change overnight, but for the perseverance to get through each day with hope. And that's an important point for all of us. Often we want quick solutions to our problems. We ask God for immediate answers, but sometimes the greatest lessons come in the waiting. It's in those moments of struggle that our faith grows the most. As the months went by, John still didn't have a new job, but something else started to change. He felt a peace inside that he hadn't had before. It wasn't that his problems disappeared, his bills were still there, and he still had no steady income. But because he was trusting in God's plan, he no longer felt overwhelmed by the situation. He knew that God was with him every step of the way. And then, one day, out of the blue, John received a call from a company he had applied to months ago. They had an opening for a position that perfectly matched his skills. After an interview, John got the job. Not only was the salary better than his previous job, but the new company had a strong Christian foundation, and John felt that this was exactly where God wanted him to be. Now, here's the beautiful part of John's story. He didn't just see this as luck or a coincidence. He knew that it was God's hand guiding him all along. The months of waiting, the prayers, the trust, it all led him to this moment. And because of what he had gone through, John's faith was stronger than ever. John's story is a reminder that even when we can't see the path ahead, God is always working behind the scenes. It's easy to get discouraged when things don't go the way we planned, but faith is about trusting that there's a bigger picture we can't always see. Just like John, we are called to trust God, even when life seems uncertain. I'm sure many of you watching this right now might be going through your own struggles. Maybe you're dealing with a job loss, a broken relationship, or some other challenge that feels too big to handle. But let me encourage you with this: God has not forgotten you. He knows every detail of your life, and He has a plan for you, just like He did for John. The Bible says in Romans 8:28, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." This verse doesn't promise that life will always be easy, but it does promise that God can take even the hardest situations and use them for our good. So as you go through your own challenges, remember John's story. Hold on to your faith. Trust in God's plan. Even when you don't see immediate results, keep praying, keep believing, and know that in His perfect timing, God will make a way. If this story resonated with you, take a moment right now to reflect and pray. Ask God for the strength to keep going, the faith to keep going, the faith to keep trusting, and the hope to keep believing in His plan for your life. You are not alone, and with God you can face any challenge that comes your way.